This is a Power BI hybrid table demo. Hybrid table in Power BI is made of three parts of data: the archive data, incremental refresh data, and the real-time data. In order to create the element of real-time data, we're using a Raspberry Pi simulator. This Raspberry Pi will send messages of temperature and humidity to our IoT hub. And then to process the data from the IoT hub, we have set up a Streamlytics job. The input is the IoT hub that receives message from the Raspberry Pi. The query is fairly simple, taking the timestamp, temperature, and the humidity and put that into the ADLS Gen 2 as a sink. And then if we take a look at the container that the Streamlytics job is syncing into, you can see some of the previous syncing data, including data from 2021 and then 2020 as well. Once we start the Raspberry Pi simulator and the Streamlytics job itself, more data will be synced in here, as well as today's data with today's timestamp. So in order to serve this data in Power BI, we're using Synapse Serverless function. So within the serverless pool in Synapse, we're creating a view that's called weather, taking all the CSV files from that particular container that the Streamlytics job is syncing into. We're giving it a schema, and then from there, because Power BI also speaks SQL, we can just query this view from the Synapse Serverless endpoint. Now, if we go to Power BI, we can do get data. And here we will need to put the Synapse as a connector, and what we will need is the serverless endpoint, which we can get from the actual portal. So we're going to copy this serverless SQL endpoint and go back to Power BI. Make sure you're using import mode, because only then you can set up incremental refresh policy. And once we have the authentication, we can pick the serverless database and the view that we wanted to query. And here we're going to do transform data, because we're going to do some parameters in order to set up incremental refresh. So we can do new parameters. You need two parameters in order to do incremental refresh: the range start being the date time, and then we can do the date as an example. And then we're going to need range end as well. These are case sensitive, so you want to make sure that you spell these right. So we have the range start date and the range end date, and we can click OK. Once we have that, we can set up a custom filter from the datetime filters, and we're going to do custom filter. And then instead of equal to, we're going to say is after or equal to, and we can pick the parameter range start, and it's going to be before equal to the range start date is the range end date is what we wanted to pick. Now we can do OK. So now the data is filtered between the range start and the range end date that we picked. And once you have those, you can do close and apply. Once the transformation has loaded the changes, you can now go to the model view and set up the incremental refresh. policy. So we can go to model and say incremental refresh. We want to set up incremental refresh. We can do last 5 years as the archive, last 3 days as incremental refresh, and then we're going to get the real-time data via direct query, and this is a premium only capability as well. So we do apply, and now in order to show you that it's working, we are going to set up 2 very simple visualizations. So first we're going to put a card in that is going to show the count of time, but instead of all of the time, we're going to show it with a filter that is basic filter before today. So we can do advanced filtering, and we're going to do is before, and then we'll pick today's date, which is 12th, and we can apply filter. Because the range end that we set up was 2021, that's why this hasn't changed. And then we can copy this, and we're going to change the filter to reflect today. So here we have the date for before today, so that should be everything archived and incrementally refreshed, versus today's date, which would have been real time. So we're going to wipe this out and set up a new filter. We're going to do relative dates, and we're going to do in last 1 day. And now we have everything set up. We can now publish to Power BI service. The reason it's not yet working is because you will need to run incremental refresh once in the Power BI service for the whole thing to start working. So now that this is publishing, we can go to Power BI service. And we're going to go and refresh this data set, which is in here. Once it's refreshed, it should bring in all of the data that we had. Instead of 20 to 11, we should have a lot more rows once the refresh is finished. And now the refresh has finished. We have all of the data that we have in the data lake Gen 2. And the left part should be all the data that's before today, and the right hand side is showing the data that's landed in the last 1 day. That includes today. So now if we go and start Raspberry Pi from here, and then we're going to start the Stream Analytics job as well. So with both of these started, very soon we should be able to see the right hand side of the visual start to have more counts of the time in, because more message has landed in the ADLS Gen 2. So let's start refreshing data sets. It's still starting. And we're going to refresh again. And as you can see, every time I refresh, there's more count landing in the right hand side because more of the messages is landing in our data lake Gen 2, whereas the left hand side, because the data is being archived and incremental refreshed, you don't see the changes of the count of records on the left hand side.